Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Now, yesterday, Greg had a discussion with our colleague Marcus, providing an update on the coronavirus and its effect on education and public places. Now, today, I've had quite a lengthy discussion with Greg about the effect of coronavirus on Western and, to an extent, Eastern economies. Now, in view of the time we had available, I've had to publish it raw without any editing whatsoever. So please accept our apologies in advance if there are any gaps between what we say or any ers or ums that may appear while we are thinking of what to say or how to answer. So you are hearing this in the raw, so to speak. Hope you enjoy it. And apologies for it being so long. Well, yesterday we published Greg and Marcus's latest update on the coronavirus. And whilst today being Tuesday, the 3rd of March, and in fact it now being 1920 GMT, rather than perhaps repeat yesterday's analysis, having looked at some of the websites, news websites, including BBC, there are interesting comments about various countries within the European Union or the Western world, which are being adversely affected by the coronavirus. Now, only a few hours ago, the Federal Reserve of the United States have reduced interest rates by a full 0.5%. And we've immediately seen gold and silver prices rise and Wall Street fall by at least some 500 points or more. What's attracting my attention, for example, is a brief headline on the BBC website today, which says Italy was the first European country to report a major surge in cases of the coronavirus, with numbers quickly climbing into the hundreds. The authorities have responded with travel restrictions in the north of the country that are bound to hit the economy. So far, a number of towns in Lombardy in northern Italy have been locked down, with very limited numbers of people being allowed in or out. Now that matters because northern Italy is the country's industrial powerhouse. Lombardy alone accounts for 40% of Italian industrial output. And Milan is Italy's key centre for finance and a range of other services. And this has led me to sort of question, well, if this is happening to Italy, which, let's be quite blunt about this, only a year or two we were talking about their banking sector being in a severe mess and their economy on the brink of recession, really, before the coronavirus even struck, then what is happening to the rest of Europe and the Western world? And I thought perhaps this might be a different angle to discuss with Greg, who I'm hoping has now managed to sign on to our channel. Greg, just checking, are you there, please?
I'm here and have heard your introduction and can pick it up quite quickly from there. Let's immediately start with, we're now on 92,819 cases of COVID-19 with 3,164 deaths. As I said at the beginning of last week, the figures would go over the 3,000 mark by the end of the weekend, and they did. And I did underestimate the number of new cases because I thought that would go over 100,000 by now. But at the rate of increase, it's fairly rapidly going that way. We now have South Korea running second to China, and South Korea has had another 851 cases since yesterday, and that brings them up to 5,186. They are likely to have per day increases escalating literally on a daily basis now. They are in a fair amount of trouble with the virus. Italy is running at 2,500 and has increased today at 466. that's a fairly sizable increase, only outstripped by South Korea and Iran. Iran has roughly the same number of cases, but it has had double the number of new cases. Italy has already clocked up 79 deaths, which is fairly high when you consider that with twice as many recorded cases, Korea has done half as many deaths. So this is a fairly dangerous outbreak. It's all very well to say, but umpteen thousand die of the flu every year, and in bad years that can amount to a fairly high figure. Yes, but the flu, the general annual flu around the world, is a morbidity rate of about 0.1%. This is a morbidity rate of around 2.5 to 3%. Well, that's 25 times to 30 times as many people die of it as the annual flu. This is a matter of grave concern. I'm not saying it's something to panic about, but grave concern is probably a safe way to put it. As Boris Johnson today said, it is his duty to plan for worst case scenario and hope that it doesn't materialize. But the British government has announced various plans to allow for worst case scenario, and worst case scenario could be 80% of the population, which would mean somewhere in the region of 1 in 5 of all people in Britain out of work at any given time with the virus. And it could run to, with 80% of a population of 67 million, that could run to literally hundreds of thousands of deaths. Mm. That is not to say it will. It is saying that is, at the moment, the mathematics. So we need to be concerned. When you think that SARS in 2003 killed 770 odd people, and that led to a 40 billion hit on the world economy. Italy last year, as Richard has said, was described as having an economy in a parlous state, with banking something of a shambles. And in all fairness, I do appreciate that Italy has had several governments since then, because governments don't last very long in Italy. But now, with escalating COVID-19 virus, I think Italy's economy must be considered to be in a very fragile state.
Greg, let me ask you, I mean, in addition to Italy, it's just springing to mind, I haven't looked this up, but another country within the European Union that were in trouble, of course, was Greece. What's happening? Any reports on what's going on there?
Well, I think, to be fair, Greece doesn't actually have an economy, does it?
No. Well, a tourist economy, perhaps, which will be affected, no doubt.
No, yes, but Greece, realistically, the news in Greece isn't coronavirus. The news in Greece is, beyond all shadow of doubt, the fact that Turkey sees itself as in a very difficult position, with literally several million immigrants and or more to the point, refugees from Syria. Mm-hmm. And they have taken off restrictions of travel within Turkey, and it would appear have been all but busing refugees in the direction of the Greek border. Mm-hmm. Greece, Hungary, and other neighbors of Turkey have grave problems with refugees. Turkey can no longer sustain the number of refugees it has been forced to take in without some support regarding Syria. The Syrians have displaced approximately 1 million people since just before Christmas, with the assistance of Russia massacring civilians, attacking hospitals, bombing schools in provinces along the border of Turkey. We have taken no serious action to prevent war. We've taken no serious action to prop up peace. We've taken no serious action in terms of sanctioning Syria, because we're undermined by Russia, that is in a strong position as a result of it. So strong that it is challenging a NATO country, Turkey, indirectly, but sufficiently challenging, and thus challenging the whole of the eastern border of the European Union in terms of refugees, when Europe has already got a problem with refugees as a result of Europe's policy, which looks to me like people trafficking. They've been picking up people in boats and immediately taking them into countries like Italy and Greece and the islands of Europe, which Europe can't sustain. So Greece, or in fact, shall we say, it has a threat in store in terms of COVID-19. It only has 7 cases so far, but this could run riot in Italy because of the number of immigrants who are basically out of control.
Well, interestingly, we had a very tentative debate the other day, and it was very brief because the purpose wasn't to discuss it. But we were talking about surgical masks and their effectiveness, and you quite rightly said they're not going to have much effect. But having said that, interestingly, at 5:30 today, it's reported 2,000 surgical masks were stolen from a French hospital today. Also, it's reported that in certain countries, protective gear such as masks and goggles used by health workers fighting coronavirus are running out. Now, if these things don't work, how come health workers are using them, and how come people are stealing them?
Well, to take surgical masks, or to put it more correctly, masks, namely the ones that cover the nose and mouth, they are not very effective in preventing yourself catching the virus. However, if you are a transmitter of the virus, but unaware of it, then they do spare those around you. So it does stop people who are health workers and carers from spreading it if they are personally transmitters with no apparent sign of symptoms. And when I say surgical mask, I mean the small mesh, for lack of a better description, tie it around your ears type mask, as opposed to the full mask, because the street masks that you see in common usage, well, they have one major flaw. In order to eat or drink, you have to remove it. They get damp from your breathing through them, net result transmitting fairly rapidly any virus you may be carrying. And once damp, the virus can move freely through the mask, and there's no real way to keep it dry.
Mm.
And the other point is that the eyes are also a great communicant of, or should I say, receptor of the virus, because the eyes have areas of mucous membrane around them, and that goes straight into the system. So those masks, I can think of better things to steal. But at the moment, masks are in demand. And in some countries, you'll find that there are people who will steal anything in demand to generate income, because the high levels, for instance, in Spain, Italy, and France, of employment among young people. Anything is better than nothing.
Yeah, and to be fair, that's the view we took, because we've put, I don't know if you've noticed actually, Greg, but we've put on the bottom of our videos some links for some surgical masks. We're not pretending for 1 minute they're going to totally prevent coronavirus, but as you rightly say, it's a barrier and it's an added protection. And for a few pounds, if it stops you spreading it to someone else, or to some degree helps eliminate someone spreading it to you, then it's not a big price to pay. But going back to Europe, what intrigues me is the fact that obviously policymakers are now severely worried about the effect on the European economy, well, on the world economy as a whole. And of course, I mentioned earlier, the US have reduced interest rates. The G7 met yesterday. Certainly the bankers within the G7 met yesterday, and they've agreed they're going to take whatever measures are necessary to ensure the respective economies do not basically collapse into out and out recession. Now, they can only go so far, because something I noticed, and this is superficial, but I went to 3 establishments today myself. 2 were eateries, and 1 was an entertainment.
You won't be able to steal any masks there.
No, I wasn't going to steal any. But yes, 2 were eateries, and 1 was a sort of entertainment place, and where they had like a cinema theatre complex, and they were almost totally empty. And I asked the proprietor of 1, and he said, it's been like this for days. So obviously people are not going out to the same degree as they were. Now, we in Britain haven't been majorly affected yet, but that's coming. So what it's like in those countries, and you mentioned Italy, for example, what it's like there now. And the concern is, and I've just had a bulletin, so if you hear these pings coming up while we speak, these are bulletins I receive. Boris Johnson has put the army on alert today, now, this evening. So how serious is all this going to get?
Well, I gave you the potential, and his statement that it was his duty to be prepared for the worst. And I totally agree with it. I believe that it was the belief that his government would be responsible in its dealings with Europe, in its dealings around the world regarding Brexit, and would not be posturing, and in its dealings, to put it in Trump's language, of clearing the swamp, where the civil service in Britain has been inclined to fight tooth and nail against the people in terms of Brexit, where the people overwhelmingly voted in favour in democratic format to leave the European Union, whilst being extraneously worked against by the government, politicians, flunkies, and the civil service to accept control from Europe.
Mm.
We don't want to be controlled, thank you. Look at the mess parts of Europe are in that we were sponsoring as the third largest contributor.
Mm.
Italy is a wreck. And now with COVID-19, its position is parlous, to say the least. Spain, Barcelona is recognized now, laughingly, as the pickpocket center of the world. With friends of mine have just been to Andorra this last weekend. They left their car in Barcelona in secure parking overnight with the hotel they were staying at, and secure parking or not, the car was emptied, and some of them lost passports and had to have new travel documents, which they couldn't get until the Monday, so they overstayed, because the crime level amongst youth reflects the total lack of jobs for youth in Spain, as with many other countries. Greece is on its knees, effectively being ruled directly by the European Union. What that has to do with democracy, I've no idea. And Italy, much the same. Greece, of course, it's something of a self-inflicted wound because the Greeks don't much like paying taxes. I'll let them in on a secret. No one likes paying taxes, but the alternative is the mess Greece is in. So nothing is as simple as it immediately looks. NATO is in trouble because of Syria, because of the fact that many of the countries in NATO will not honor their commitment to put in the requisite amount of funding that they agreed to in the first place, with Turkey buying in equipment and receiving equipment from Russia, who can hardly be seen as the friend of NATO. You must remember that during the debacle of Cuba and its missile crisis, when John Kennedy was there, he gambled with the world's security and safety in very much the same sort of way that Trump would appear to be doing. Luckily, it paid off, but it was only a matter of luck. And although everybody thought that he had done brilliantly in forcing the Russians to remove their missiles from Cuba, what never seemed to get the coverage was the fact that that had not been forcing the Russians to remove their missiles from Cuba. It was done on a trade-off that America would remove its missiles from Turkey. And if it did that, Khrushchev would withdraw his missiles from Cuba. So that was something of a Pyrrhic victory at the end of the day. As I say, things are never as they seem. Look at the mess that is going on over the Ukraine, because it would appear that neither America nor the European Union understood the Ukraine one iota. The Ukraine is a gateway for gas, particularly from Russia, a gateway for its supply into Europe. Although the Ukraine is ostensibly no longer a part of the Russian Soviet, of the USSR, since the USSR has effectively been dismantled, there was no way in which the Ukraine was going to be permitted to take an independent position from Russia, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And Crimea had been signed over by Khrushchev as something of a titular gift to the Ukraine, but there was no ways that Crimea was going to remain a part of the Ukraine if Ukraine was talking in terms of independence from Russia. let's not forget that the Ukraine was effectively on loan. Sorry, correction. The area, the Crimea, was effectively on loan to the Ukraine from Russia because it is the Russian Navy's port with access to a warm ocean via the Mediterranean, and the Russian Navy is stationed there, and they weren't planning on giving control of the Russian Navy to the Ukraine. Furthermore, it is the main tourist area for the people of Russia on a warm port and a warm seaboard. So there was no way that they were going to be permitted to retain Crimea. They lost it back to Russia with much clamor from the Ukraine and the rest of the world. It was inevitable. And what people don't seem to have taken into consideration is that with the dismantling of the USSR came the principle that one could worship, and one finds that Christianity burgeoned again in Russia, and the Russian Orthodox Church is the fount of that religion right across the USSR, particularly in Russia. But the head of that church is Kiev. So there again, Ukraine was not likely to be able freely to make its own decisions that were contra Russia.
Yeah, but I'm trying to ascertain what this has to do with coronavirus and the effect on the Western economy, Greg.
The failure of people to consider the other events that are going on. How are you going to control coronavirus if it breaks out in one of the refugee camps? How do you plan on, does the Western world plan on controlling coronavirus if it works out in, albeit not a very hot zone, but I think we could discuss the Ukraine and Crimea at the moment as something of a temperate war zone. I don't mean in terms of temperature, I mean in terms of hot war. Turkey, how are they going to be able to control coronavirus when they have millions of refugees? Already we see that it is likely that, and has been quoted by certain medical sources, that there are thought to be tens of thousands of undeclared cases of coronavirus in America. We have had communicated on this channel by a doctor in LA who says he is not prepared ethically to continue to toe the party line, and he has announced that very few people are being checked. Net result, very few people are being discovered to have coronavirus. And as a point of interest, in a country that has no viable health system, and it can probably cost you in the region of $100 to have a check, who is footing the bill and who is being checked? And if you are able to scrape together the money for yourself to have it done, because America, for all its clamoring of wealth and civilization, is a country of immense poverty, with 45,000 people living in trailer parks in and around Houston, just as an example, with great swathes of the country across the Midwest, which are little more than clapboard housing that is time expired. And you go to what appear to be wealthy areas and take a turn off the main track, and you can find yourself traveling around in Baltimore, which is just mile upon mile of projects. Many of them boarded up. And America's poverty is such that it doesn't have a health system. It just squabbles about who's allowed to use a hospital. Obamacare had its faults, but no fault is as great as having no health system, or a health system that has to be paid for when used to the tune that even fairly routine illnesses can bankrupt families and make them homeless. This is not civilization. Would somebody let the politicians of America know that? I appreciate politicians in America are obscenely overfunded, and it's a matter of who can afford to buy the senior offices. This is not civilization, neither is it democracy. Don't fool yourself.
Yes, but I'm more interested on this debate on the economy as a whole. And clearly, I mean,
the economy in America is a whole.
Well, you have huge diversifications of wealth. You have some of the richest people in the world and some of the poorest. But you can align that to China. Similarly, in China, you have billionaires in China. You have people working in the rice fields earning pennies a day or the equivalent. The same exists in Russia, Greg. Wherever you go, you have these huge disparities between those that have money and those.
Oh, I don't disagree.
But my issue is, I mean, coming back very briefly, because this is running on now, because we've talked about Khrushchev, and I would have rather talked about Jerome Powell and the governor of the Bank of England and all of these people, because they're now more relevant. We may very well have a rate cut in the United Kingdom tomorrow. And if it's not tomorrow, Thursday tends to be the day they like reducing or increasing rates. So if the G7 bankers have got together, and the heads of G7, or the finance ministers, I should say, and they had their meeting yesterday and they've come up with a deal. The US have cut their rates. Australia's cut its rates. Not that it's part of the G7, but basically, I think we will find that tomorrow, or certainly Thursday, we will have a rate cut in the United Kingdom. The only difference being, of course, is that America has cut its rates now from 1.25%. The Fed funds rate moves between 1 and 1.25. Our rates at the moment are currently, if I remember correctly, 0.75%. So obviously the amount that we can reduce rates by is severely restricted. So do we see a 0.25% coming down from 3/4 to half?
I think there's every possibility of that, in that there is a desperation to stimulate the economy in the face of COVID-19. And I think it's going to backfire on the basis that, yes, I think that the immediate reduction will give rise to the gamblers in pinstripe suits using other people's money, putting money back into the exchange, but it isn't going to last, because it will dawn on them that they are being played like fish on a line by governments and banks, and they will realize that the situation is potentially
grave,
hugely worse than it appears on the surface. This will lead to, in my opinion, which is not to be taken because I'm not qualified for any form of advice, but in my opinion and my experience, I believe that this will give rise to an immediate flush on of shares, stocks and bonds, but a very rapid switch from that, when people realize what's going on, into precious metals, particularly gold. And the reason I say particularly gold is that the precious metals most sought after are gold, platinum, and silver. Gold has its own value. Washington State now has 9 deaths from coronavirus, just been flashed up on my computer. Gold has its own value and has been steadily rising over the last couple of months. It's had the odd lurch back, but overall it is way up. And Gold has its own value. However, silver and to some extent platinum are dependent on industrial usage. And when one looks around at industrial challenges at the moment that are from the COVID-19, usage is likely to fall. That means that silver and platinum will not be able to sustain growth at the rate that gold will.
No. And that's something I've been banging on really for a number of years, because of course we had, as you know, 2 years ago, the fear of recession because of the tariffs and the trade wars with China and other countries. Totally agree with you on that, Greg. And I think when you mention about an initial flush on the stock market, it did happen for about, I think, an hour. And then the stocks went straight into reverse. I think they seem to forget. There was an old adage, and we raised this last year in our Illuminati Silver videos. The general consensus was, if you have 3 consecutive interest rate cuts in the United States and no more, the markets revive, recover, and advance. When you have a 4th, it's normally an inclination of a pending or almost imminent recession. And of course, America has now had its 4th. It took a little while, but it's had its 4th today. And by 0.5%, I think the Fed made a mistake. They cut it by 0.5%, thereby indicating, oh my God, things are far worse than we thought. They might have got away with it with a 1/4. And now we've got the Dow Jones down 780 points, the S&P down 90, the NASDAQ down 267. Now this will be followed through by other equity markets tomorrow when they open. And I think that rather than it bolster the market, there's a great danger. It has caused not a panic, but has caused huge concern. And of course, gold and silver has gone up. However, we have to bear in mind that at the same time, we have the likes of Warren Buffett and similar investors saying, hold on, we'll come out of the equity market. We won't put the money into gold and silver. We'll hold it in cash so that when the equities fall, the percentage we expect it to, then we can plow back in. But as no one knows the length and extent of this coronavirus effect, that may not be a good strategy. Maybe the answer now is gold. We're certainly starting to buy on dips. Silver will eventually catch up, but I think the diversification between the two will continue for a while yet, for the reasons you've stated.
I also think, Richard, that people at their peril overlook the fact that if silver goes up, all it takes is mine more, because it's already cheaper to take it out of the ground in many instances than to buy it on the exchange. So it doesn't hold up on value because you can make the stuff. Unlike gold, which is pricey to extract.
Yes.
And I have watched, when I lived in South Africa, I have watched gold mines open and close on a $5 shift of the price of gold, because if it fell $5, it didn't pay to take it out of the ground.
Yeah.
It is that finely balanced. And although that was during the apartheid era, this was the terrible, heinous country with its apartheid regime, which a country where the greatest problem it had was illegal immigrants wanting to come into the country, not escape it.
Greg, we better end it there. This would be much longer than planned, but I'm going to put this...
Our conversations always are.
Yeah, and I'm going to put this up raw. I'm not going to edit any ers and ums or any sort of gaps, because I simply don't have time. And I think it's more important to get this up and out to our audience. So I will ask everyone in advance Please accept our apologies if there are some gaps or time lapses between our questions and answers or our commentary. Sometimes I manage to edit them out, but because of the lateness and because of the timeliness of all this, I'd rather get this video out and then beg your forgiveness thereafter.
Richard, I wholly agree with you there. However, I make no apology for my ums, ers, and pauses. You try, Kibo.
Thank you, Greg. Speak soon.
My pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles, and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.